Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Gal. I'm a product manager at Starkware, and I'm joined here by Avichal and Paul, who are two of the probably most successful VC crypto investors out there. Paul is with Pantera since 2014, and he's also with the board of Starkware. And Avichal is with Electric Capital, and he was previously a partner at Y Combinator. Usually in this kind of conferences, we hear from a lot of builders and developers who present their work. And very often on the flip side of that, there's an investor who sees that work, but they also see a broader picture of the ecosystem in the market. And that's kind of what we're going to hear more about today. So to kick us off, you've been in crypto for a while. You've seen all the summers, winters, bears, bulls. Where do you think we are at today, and what gets you excited about crypto today?
I didn't realize you'd been at Pantera since 2014. That's impressive.
Yeah,
that's a lot of cycles.
You
should go first. Wow.
Yeah, I can go first.
Congratulations.
I guess again, I've been in the ecosystem since 2014. I got excited about Bitcoin in 2013. I'd been in venture for a few years, and I just felt like I was just looking for something that was just a little bit different than what people were looking at. And I came across Bitcoin. I felt like there was nothing like this in terms of both, store of value, value transfer, and sort of a mechanism to sort of bring trust to sort of value in general, digital value. And so, I was thinking about like how Bitcoin could really be helpful for the emerging markets, and eventually cryptocurrencies in general could be helpful for payments, whether they are sort of e-commerce payments or whether they're around cross-border payments. And yeah, it's been quite the journey. I mean, I think for us, like, we've looked really deeply at first into entrepreneurs that were trying to really just kind of bring both retail and institutional access to crypto. What does that look like? That looks like investing into things that look like Coinbase in different geographies, really trying to help facilitate some of the on-ramps to get into crypto. And so that started off with things like Bitstamp and Circle and Zappo, and then through that sort of thesis building, really kind of built a lot of connections with communities all around the world. And actually, I remember going to Tel Aviv in 2015. This was when the government was trying to get more innovation into fintech, and I went out there and I spoke about blockchain. And little I know that we'd have some of the most transformative companies coming out of the Tel Aviv ecosystem, starting with Starkware and some of the other early companies. And I think for us, like, we are excited to be backing entrepreneurs through each of these different cycles. Starting in 2017, 2018, really just kind of started off with Ethereum, and then I think more recently we started to see some application layer stuff. So I guess to just kind of jump into some of the more recent stuff that we've been looking at, I think wrote a little bit about decentralized social recently. I think there is an opportunity to really get out to consumers these days. Started off with things like Big Cloud, maybe it's Friend.tech, but really just enabling creators and consumers to really directly connect with each other and sort of increase ways to monetize. And I think part of that, comes with added data on-chain and off-chain that can really sort of provide a much better consumer experience. And I think that happens through, again, blockchain and cryptocurrency. You want to?
Yeah, I have a question. Okay. If you're here, I assume you're basically full-time in crypto/blockchain. Okay, so raise your hand if you joined this space in 2023 or earlier. Presumably that's everybody here. So your hand should be up right now. Okay, so keep your hand up. Keep your hand up. 2023 or earlier. Okay. Keep your hand up if it's 2022 or earlier that you went full-time. Okay. Keep your hand up if it's 2021 or earlier, 2020, 2019. 2018. Wow, we got some old timers in here. Look at this. 2017, 2016, 2015, 2014. Okay, great. So actually for like half the audience, this is not your first cycle. Somebody still had their hand up at 2013, which is impressive. So maybe Satoshi's in the audience here. So that's actually, I think we're clearly, Gal, to answer your question, we're definitely in the winter part of the cycle. And I think for half the people here, you've already been through at least one cycle. And so you know that probably it will come back. The only thing that sort of keeps me up at night about this cycle a little bit is two things. One, everybody seems to say it's a cycle, and then whatever happens is, whatever everybody thinks is going to happen is not actually what happens, and so that worries me that everybody now thinks that there's a cycle, and so maybe this cycle is different for that reason. The second is this is actually the first crypto cycle where the macro backdrop hasn't been that great. There's actually might be a recession, whereas the last 10 years were actually pretty great. And so, that could be tough. I will say, I actually think that maybe that's okay. Like, if it turns out it takes an extra 2 or 3 years for the space to come back, that might actually be the healthiest thing possible, because I think that these 4-year cycles are very compressed, and you end up with some people who make so much money so quickly that a lot of people get burned. And so, usually when people ask the summer-winter cycle kind of question, people are really wondering, like, when does this thing come back? And my sort of hot take is I hope it doesn't come back on a 4-year cycle. I hope we have a slightly longer bear market. And the reason is because I think the tech is actually good now. Like, you can actually, if you think about 2017, for those of you that you were around in that cycle, there are all these things that were theoretical with the early part of the ICO boom. If everybody remembers, stable coins will be real one day, ETH will move to proof of stake one day, layer 2s will launch one day and they'll be performant. DeFi will be real one day. Maybe we have an ETF one day. Like, all these things were sort of theoretical in 2017, and pretty much all of them have happened, which is pretty remarkable. Like five or so years later, and like on a 10-year technology cycle, we're about on track for what you'd expect. Like, halfway through the cycle, a lot of the tech is real that was once theoretical. My concern is that if it comes back too quickly, that the rails have gotten so good, and everybody in the world knows about this stuff now, and so you might actually get 500 or 600 million people to show up in the next cycle. And we may not be ready for that. Like, the security may not be good enough. Like, we may actually poison the well. So my hot take actually is I hope the cycle is actually a little bit extended. I hope the bear market is actually a little bit longer, because it'll give everybody in this room time to build. And we can actually build good user experiences and guardrails and make sure people don't blow up and lose all their money. And the grifters can stay in AI for like another 6 or 12 months, and like not come back to here for a while. Like, basically, if you're an NFT grifter in 2020, you're probably an AI grifter now. So. Like, those people can stay in AI for another 2 years. So anyway, that's my hot take. We're in a winter, but I hope winter is sort of extra long this time, because I think it's probably the healthiest possible thing for us.
Awesome. So that's a good overview. I want to start diving a little deeper into Starknet and what we're doing here and the infrastructure side of things. So you're actually on a panel earlier this week together with Hasib from Dragonfly at SBC, and you said something that really struck a chord with me, and that is that we're all sort of in the business of selling block space, which I think really resonates with what we're doing at Starknet, because we're expanding the block space of Ethereum. So we all believe that block space is valuable and we need more of it. But the question is why? Like, why do we need so much block space? What is the world going to do with all that block space that we're working so hard to create?
Was this the panel where I just said I'm just going to disagree with
Yeah, but he's not here, so.
Okay, I'm just going to disagree with everything Paul says. These panels are a lot more fun if people actually disagree instead of saying the same thing. So I'm just going to take the other side of whatever Paul says. What do you think? Do we need lots of block space or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the application, but I think yes. I mean, at the end of the day, look, I mean, I think there's applications out there like, for instance, like crypto gaming or micropayments. I mean, we backed some of these companies really early on, and at the end of the day, I mean, we just never really sort of had the capabilities to actually make those applications actually work. And so I think being able to provide a lot more scalability, what Starkware provides, I think, and then of course, like, building on Ethereum with composability, I think it is extremely helpful. And so, yeah, that's kind of my answer.
Man, it's hard to disagree with more block space.
What do we need it for?
Well, I think ultimately there's sort of two answers to that. There's the theoretical answer, and then there's a practical answer. In theory, it's sort of like every layer of infrastructure for all of computational history. As soon as you put it out there, some developer stumbles into some way to use it all up, and then that's why computers are 1,000,000 times more powerful today than they were in the year 2000, and they're slower than they were in the year 2000. And it's just like the application sucks up all the available bandwidth, basically. And so I suspect the same things will happen here. People will find and discover new ways to use this stuff very quickly, actually. I mean, that's what's so amazing, I think, about the developer ecosystem at scale on the internet. So you can get 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 developers developing every month. just it's a random walk in some sense, and somebody's going to stumble into something amazing. And then 2017 was CryptoKitties. There's Fcoin along the way to figure out liquidity mining. It's just like somebody stumbles into something, and then the things goes viral. You look at OpenAI, it went to 100 million users with ChatGPT overnight after sitting on top of this infrastructure for 2 years. So when somebody finds it, all the available infrastructure will get used. So that's the sort of theoretical answer. The practical answer is I think there's a whole. In my opinion, probably the 2 or 3 most interesting things right now are, I think, fintech built on top of crypto rails, especially with US dollar as the stable coin. And a lot of people in the world, I would posit 2 to 4 billion people in the world want US dollars and they can't get them because they're trying to fight their own local fiat, inflation, which I think is also, if you guys know Elon's law, it's the assertion that the most entertaining outcome is the most likely. And I just think it's hilarious that the U.S. dollar might be the killer cryptocurrency, given what Satoshi started this whole thing off as. But I think a lot of people in the world want U.S. dollars and block space for applications to move that around. And then 2 is literally just games. Like humans just want to play games. I mean, crypto is a game. Social media is a game. You might, if you want to get really meta, like life is a game. We're just all accruing fake points to play this game. So humans love playing games, and I suspect there are in the next 2 years, there's probably going to be a dozen games that hit that might actually be fun to play.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where like you can do games, you can actually process things like off chain, but to really actually have like crypto native games where you get again like verifiable compute and really sort of on chain like dynamics, that's what you sort of need block saves for.
Yeah, I agree, and it's kind of funny because this panel is right in between the conversation that we had with Kai Sheffield from Visa and Topology, who are building on-chain games. So
those are the 2 use cases, in my opinion.
Exactly.
2 killer use cases.
So let's double down on that. So we do need block space, but I'm personally in the business of infrastructure, right? Like as part of Starknet. I think that many of the people in this room are excited about infrastructure. It feels to me that many of the best and brightest minds in crypto are building infrastructure, sort of hoping that users will come. So my question is, what has to happen for users actually to come and use all those awesome technologies that we're all building?
You want me to go first, or you want to go first?
I can go first. I'd be interested to see how you disagree with that. I think I think right now, I mean, there's a lot of experimentation that's going on with infrastructure. Whether it's things like restaking or whether it's cross-chain stuff, et cetera. And so I think one way to sort of go to market right now is B2B2C. So if you're thinking about like creating infrastructure to tokenize the stock market and sort of do what Circle is doing for the digital dollar, instead of going directly to hedge funds or directly to consumers, where you have to spend a lot of time educating them, you can go to maybe an exchange or a brokerage who already has that trust with someone else and basically say, hey, is this a new product or new revenue line that you want to offer to your customer base? And it's a lot easier to go directly to a business that's looking to sort of expand versus directly with the customer. And I think that's one way to sort of go to market, where at the end of the day, the end customer doesn't really sort of need to know as much about the infrastructure, and you can sort of provide value to these businesses, and it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, I think, technologists and engineers like building stuff. It's probably one of the most common ways that people fail, technical people. Like you start with a thing that you think is cool to build, and then the culture that you build wants to solve all the hardest technical problems instead of solving the problems that users want you to solve. And so I actually think probably most people should not be building infrastructure. Most people should just stop building infrastructure and instead go figure out what users actually want and go talk to some people and ask them what their problems are, and then try to solve those problems. And try to solve the problems without using any words that crypto people use. Like don't use the word token, don't use the word decentralized, don't use the word L2, don't use the word ZK, yada yada. Like just get rid of all of that vocabulary and just talk to somebody and be like, what problem do you have? And if you can't solve their problem without using any of those words, you're probably not actually solving their problem. There are some exceptions clearly, but yeah, I would actually encourage people to stop building infrastructure. Maybe that's my hot take for an infrastructure conference.
Did you find any interesting company, or did you invest in any company that falls into the category recently, or?
I think it's yeah. I mean, one example here for just for people who are through the launch cycle is you might argue a lot of the alt L1s sort of took this approach, right? They built a bunch of tech, and were not that precise about what end user problem that would actually solve, or why that was actually meaningful. Like, why does actually anybody care? But the history of technology, I think, is riddled with these things, right? You can look at JavaScript. Like, does anybody really love writing JavaScript? No. Like, what does that tell you, right? What that tells you is that what the user wants wins. And so if you have a better go-to-market, if you can acquire users more cheaply, those, if you can build a network effect, those things are actually the things that ultimately matter and win. And so, and to be clear, like, if this were a room full of MBAs, I would give the opposite advice, right? Like, part of being a good advisor or investor is like recognizing the audience and sort of helping them sort of in a personalized way. This audience, I suspect, is more likely to end up making that error. Whereas if this was like at Stanford GSB or something, or Harvard Business School, the advice would be like, please stop talking about Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints and user studies. Can you just like go build something? And if you go build something, you'll probably learn a lot. But I suspect for this audience, the advice actually has to be the opposite.
Right, so now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the work that you've been doing as venture capitalists in the ecosystem. And one such example is the developer report that Electric Capital recently put out,
Yep.
Where you sort of track and show the growth in developer activity in various ecosystems.
Yeah.
So if you could talk a little more about that, why do you
Sure.
create this report? And also more broadly, like, what are the interesting metrics that macro metrics or ecosystem metrics that you think are interesting to track?
Yeah, so we started publishing this report, I want to say in 2018. I have to go back and look. And it came out of just a question we were asking ourselves internally around, well, how do we know where there's fundamental value? Right? There's sort of the price movements of the tokens, but that's not really fundamental value. In some sense, that's the output. And the input is like, well, how many people are doing stuff on chain? How much block space is being used? How much gas is being used? How many developers are actually building interesting things, which then end users will actually use? And so as we were looking around, the data we couldn't find was anything robust on developers. Like, who's actually building, and where are they, and what are they building, and how committed are they, and are they good developers? How, are they writing code once and then leaving, or are they actually sticking around and being retained? Like, all these things that we sort of learned in places like Facebook and Google. And so we said, well, we can't find the data, so we'll just get the data. So we built a crawling system to crawl all of GitHub, and I think at this point we're crawling something like 500 million lines of code, and we synthesize it all. And there's a great taxonomy, it's open source on our GitHub that people can go contribute to, and we use that as sort of the seeds to go kick off the crawling and categorize things into different ecosystems. And so really the fundamental question we were trying to ask was, well, where are the developers? Because that's a precursor, in our opinion, as a fundamental driver of value to where the users will be. Because if you have great infrastructure, which brings in great developers, the developers building great applications is what's going to build, give you great users. And so as investors, if we have an earlier signal than the rest of the market in terms of, of course, like everybody can see some user app is taking off or going viral. If we have the precursor signal to that, well, this is where we want to spend our time. And so we sort of built that data system on our own and maintain it today, and we publish this annual report. In terms of the data that's coming out of it that I think is most interesting, I think the ecosystem level stuff is pretty fascinating. Like, where are there clusters of developers, and kind of how are they congregating, and where are you starting to see network effects? Because if it's just sort of, if you have that community, it's pretty likely that something will emerge from that community. And so it's really interesting to see how some of these communities are taking off and how committed those developers are. And so the kind of stuff we really pay attention to are these clusters. So for example, there are clusters around EVM now. A lot of people are sort of snapping to that, as I'm sure a lot of people here know. Or if you believe certain technologies are going to take off, certain ZK technologies, for example, like who's building those proof systems, or who's building, the programming language to build these circuits, and like where are you seeing those network effects take off, regardless of how good the technology is, right? And that's a really good signal. And then the other thing we really try to look at is retention, like which of these actually have highly retained developers, and that are writing a lot of code. And fortunately, even though the top headline numbers are sort of down, if you go just look at developerreport.com, the headline numbers are a little bit down. But when you sort of do one level deeper on that, what's great is actually the people who write the most of the code, like people who write 80% of the code in the system, are basically flat. And so what it really says is the people who are writing a small minority of the code, people who are doing 20% of the code commits, those are the people that are turning over. But that's fine. Those were not the people that were full-time committed here. So kind of when you go like one or two levels deeper, there's actually a lot of positive signals in there too, even though the headline numbers are down right now. I will say if that continues for like 3 years, that might be bad. Right, because that's effectively our top of funnel. Like what you see in each cycle is all these people come in as hobbyists. They come through some hackathon that somebody's doing. They go to some conference. They get sort of committed. They start writing some code. They stumble into something they think is really interesting. They start spending nights and weekends on it. Then they get a job doing it full time, and then they're committed. And you don't want that pipeline to dry up. And so if we're still in that state where like the top line number is continuing to go down for 2 or 3 years, that might be concerning. But for right now, it doesn't look too bad.
All right, this is actually lying, and we kind of out of time. So if we could take, I think, one question. Is there any one question in the crowd? No question. Great.
There's a shy audience.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So thank you for joining us, and I hope that you could hang out a little more
we'll
if
hang
we
out,
want to
sure.
chat with you. Actually, there is one question over there. Yes.
Hello. Where we've seen retention from users in the past several years, especially, and then also right now with the launch of Base, we've seen retention from users in social apps, in games particularly, non-financial applications of blockchains. Where else, like what other non-financial applications of blockchains are you guys thinking about or maybe investing in right now that you guys think could be hyperscaler for audience growth in the next couple of years, besides SocialFi and games?
It's a great question. Want to go first?
You go first.
Okay. One area I'm pretty interested in is around NFTs, sort of as infrastructure. And I think there are 2 or 3 use cases that I think are really interesting with NFTs. One is luxury goods. If you think about maybe the only market bigger than money is social capital. If you think about the world's richest man, Bernard Arnault, he literally what he does, his business, LVMH, their business is to take your capital so you can turn it into social capital, so you can socially signal to all the other primates in the world that you have excess capital. And so the idea of people doing that digitally to me makes a lot of sense. Sort of adjacent to that is the idea of sort of collectibles, things like Pokemon cards or baseball cards, things like that. That's just a thing that humans need to do, almost as an adjacency to money, but it's sort of as a game with entertainment value. And what's really interesting, kind of similar to sort of Bitcoin versus Ethereum, what makes that stuff really interesting to me is that it's programmable. So in the offline world, like you can't write code around a Rolex or a Patek or an LVMH bag or a Birkin bag. But in the digital world, not only do you get the Birkin bag, but you get the ability to write code around that thing. And I think that's going to create, in the same way that Ethereum sort of created this explosion of stuff around financial applications beyond Bitcoin, I think that's going to create an explosion of interesting games or use cases or communities or chats or and so on. And so actually, it's adjacent to SocialFi, I think. If I had to guess, actually, I think a lot of the NFT experimentation is what crypto native social will look like, because the graph there is fundamentally different and the uses are fundamentally different. But I think something in that sort of primordial soup of people socially signaling to each other that they have excess capital and wanting to talk to each other around that stuff or create communities around that stuff or feel tribal identification with these items and signal to each other about that is like a very human behavior to me, and this just enables that at internet scale.
Yeah, I think similar to that. I mean, there's some similarities or some integrations between identity and SocialFi. So I think
Identity's a good one too.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the entry point in how to sort of build these decentralized identities is going to be sort of crucial, whether it's through events or whether it's through other sort of NFTs, communities, things like that. But then being able to give people the control of what is their sort of identity, and then be able to then in real time sort of adjust customer experiences based off of the data and what their identity holds, I think is valuable. And then of course being able to passport that across.
Identity is a really interesting one too. We actually we're investors in 2 companies that are approaching this really differently. One is a company called Spruce. They now have a pilot with a California DMV. Like literally, you can go get the California DMV app on your phone and take a picture of your driver's license, and once once it scans your face and everything, it's fine. It does it locally, but you now have a public-private key on your phone, right? So you can actually make cryptographic commitments via your phone about certain facts and generate a ZK proof to say, hey, imagine you're a 21-year-old woman and you go to the bar down the street all the time, you could prove to the bouncer that you're 21 without revealing your home address. Like, that's actually pretty cool, right? So, and there's another one actually that sort of stumbled into this. This is not where they started, but they're still a little bit in stealth, so I won't say who they are, but they essentially make it really easy for patients to give consent to a pharmaceutical company to get access to the medical records. So they're not trying to bring the records on chain. They're just making it really easy to have sort of an ID system that allows you to give permission and sort of coordinate between the pharma company and the hospital and the patient. And as a result, patients can get access to clinical trials much more easily. But it's all, if you think about these kinds of things, right, like, they don't get sold as a crypto thing. It just happens to be that cryptography and distributed systems and zero-knowledge proofs are like the building blocks to make that happen, which goes back to kind of what I was talking about earlier, is if you can go solve a problem for somebody and you never have to use the word crypto or token or decentralized, and you actually solve their problem, there are actually probably a bunch of businesses to be built because the technology over the last 5 years has gotten so good. So in some sense, we're really excited about people who come to us and are like, hey, I solved this problem. And by the way, it happens to use a bunch of cryptography and distributed systems and zero-knowledge proofs and whatever. But we don't mention that anywhere in the deck. Like that actually would be, that to me is like real success for this space, is we're just solving problems without having to ever use the technology terms.
All right. Awesome. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody.
Hope
Thank
you
you so
enjoyed
much.
it.